Good morning and welcome to this week's recruitment discussion with Jump. Last week we discussed why managers are the most important people in your business, and in this is a new series of webinars we discuss everything to do with building your management spine, developing a succession plan, and looking at leadership strategy. These sessions will be all about your productivity or your productive people and how to retain, how to develop them, and how to make sure that your business really sort of moves forward on that sort of front. So this week we're going to kick off with from big biller to leader, how to approach management, leadership, and strategy to grow. But as always, let's kick in with some stats that we've sort of looked at in this marketplace and what's happening in the marketplace. So 69% of managers are uncomfortable with communicating with employees. An oldie but a goodie, 50% of employees quit their boss, not their job. And managers account for at least 70% of the variance in employee engagement. 71% of employees believe hiring from within is the best for scaling a business. And nearly 2/3 of employees believe promoting from within beats hiring externally, where there are two or more likely to say that they prefer being managed by someone who has come from internal rather than someone who is being brought in from externally. 1 in 4 employees support hiring managers from outside the business when it comes to time to pivot. And 56% of employees believe promoting from within is better for morale. However, 1 in 5 employees quit or consider quitting after being passed over promotion for a peer, and those passed over promotion by an outsider are 15 times more likely to quit considering that they've been bypassed by an outsider. Companies who fail to choose their candidates with the right talent for a job are 82%. So that's companies who fail to choose the candidate with the right talent for the job is at 82%, and that came from Gallup. Great managers seem scarce, and it's because talent is required is a really rare. Gallup's research again revealed that about 1 in 10 people possess the right management talents. However, when companies can increase the number of talented managers and double the rate of engagement of employees, they achieve on average, according to Gallup, 147% higher earnings per share than their competitors. So everything that I've read on this topic points to one thing. Irrespective of billing, it's finding the right person to manage the team. That's the most important part of every leader's and owner's role. So this week I'm joined by Dave, Paul, and Heather. So we're going to get really stuck into this week's session. It's a quiet session, probably because most people are expecting to be at the expo. So that's next week now. So we'll be working from there. We're going to kick off with a nice, easy question, as always. Okay, and as always, we might go to Heather first because she's HR on this, so she'll love this. Okay,
so and you know how much I love being first, Howard.
You love the first question. You love this one. Why in recruitment do we still insist on promoting only on financial performance?
It's a great opening question, and I'll give you a non-HR answer. Actually, the vast majority, there are still some real highlights of people who get this. But I think we don't think as an industry widely enough about what a good manager looks like. And so it's just easy. It's a little bit lazy. It's just a progression thing. And we're trying to keep people in, and we build promotion structures, and we don't think in detail about what the talent is that we need. And those stats support that, Howard. We don't think about the talent and the skills that we need to become a manager. It becomes just part of our standard promotion structure that you do this, you do this, you do this, you become a manager, without thinking about either the skills or the development and support we need.
Yeah, I think Heather says it very well. Look, it's perfectly understandable that we as an industry are, if you like, fixated on our financial success, and naturally we are admiring of the people in our businesses who help promote and develop our financial position. In other words, our big billers. And naturally, these are the people that have sort of hero status in our businesses, but they're not, as we're going to talk about, necessarily the right people to promote into management levels. We do have this kind of myopic view that it's only people who have demonstrated success at making money that can move up the promotional ladder. And I think this has been in evidence ever since I started in the industry, which, as everybody jokes, was when there were gas lamps, dinosaurs. I don't think all those things, but I mean, it's always been like that. You know, people that make the most money tend to get promoted, and it's a very narrow view. I think as we're now moving into this, as we are in this new era, there are more layers to consider, as Heather was intimating.
Yeah, I think until we redefine what success is, we can't redefine promotions, because everything is, for the most part, in a lot of companies, it is about financial success. It is about KPIs and CVs and all the things that we know that make our businesses run and can add to the bottom line. But success can be, as we know, and we'll talk about, so many other things. And if we measure those other aspects of success, then we will have a much better judgment criteria as to whether somebody's going to make promotion. I think we've all known that sometimes the very worst people you can promote are your biggest billers.
So I think it's really interesting, because I think, you know, Heather, you hit it in the head there. It's the fear upsetting that key member of staff who's your big biller. And I think that's caused by the lack of a genuine career structure within the business that outlines, this is your financial performance, this is your behavioural performance, and this is the management performance that we're expecting as you go up that career ladder. And therefore the career ladder should deviate at one point from going down a management spine into going down a big billing spine, so people have a choice. And I think because there isn't there, then the natural assumption is that you will inherit the next position as you go up the ladder. And I think the UK has got this horrible position of the, you know, I'm in a leadership role. It's great for my career that I'm called a leader, I'm called a manager. And people then get very protective about that title more than anything else. And I think that's probably part of that problem, is that they see that as that's the next progression to become a manager, whether they want to become a manager or not. And we were talking last week when we had her on the webinar last week about some of the clients that we've working with on management training and how many people they've put onto those courses to discover whether or not they want to be a manager.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, is part of that career structure, because that's part of their career structure and how it's outlined to them, so people can start to establish early. So looking at that then, pushing that little bit further down the line, we know transitioning from a biller to manager is really hard. So the question then is, when should the transition begin?
Well, I'm just to pick up. Oh, sorry, Heather, do you want to go first?
No.
I mean, just to pick up on the point you've made, that using that word assumption, there's an assumption often that people that are our best billers want to be managers. And in fact, I think Heather's just kind of was about to make a similar point, that that's a very poor assumption to make. A lot of the big billers, the last thing they want to do is manage other people, you know, and in fact, when they're pressed into managing others, very often it goes in the wrong direction. They don't have the skill sets. They're not particularly interested in managing others, and because of their general demeanor, which is to make a lot of money, they're probably happier just managing themselves and continuing to do that. So it's something to look very hard at. And this point about transitioning from biller to manager being hard, when should the transition begin? It starts, I think, from getting close to your people to understand what their skill sets are and where their ambitions lie, what they want from a career with the business. Because I think at that point, when you start to identify their skill sets and their ambitions and goals, you can start to put in play a career plan and coaching and training that enable them to get there. And that is not necessarily looking at your highest billers and thinking that they're the only people that are likely to transition into those senior roles.
And Paul, do you know, I think it actually starts even sooner than that. So it starts in the expectations you create when you're hiring people.
Yeah.
I've heard so many people glibly talk about, gosh, you can join us as a trainee, and then you've got this exciting role in front of you where you could become a manager with your own team, and the idea is to build, and it's just this glib giveaway. Whereas actually we could be setting the ground much earlier when we're recruiting to people to say, you can have a great career here, and it might involve managing people, but it might not, it might involve other things.
Yes.
And what we're going to do early in your career is help you to work out what you're good at. and help you to work out where your ambitions are and develop a career that's really about you and your skills, and then will support you in what that ambition becomes, rather than just creating this expectation that leadership is something for all to aspire to, because it's not, well, it shouldn't be. Right.
But absolutely, and of course people's attitudes also change, so that, you know, somebody in the early stages of their career may think that it's not for me, but a few years later their attitudes may change. So, you know, this continuous conversation with people, ensuring that we're close to and understanding where they want to go, and of course the longer we work alongside people, the more we understand their characteristics, their behaviors, their values, and so forth, is what's going to determine their longer term career. That is indeed if they have a long-term career with the business, because as we would often talk about the sort of so-called Generation Z, is there an assumption that they're going to be with you for 2, 5, 10 years? Because I think that in itself is probably a mistake, but we're probably pushing off into a different direction if I go down that route.
That's a whole other webinar.
That's a whole other webinar, Paul, but there's an assumption there that when you start to talk to Gen Z, is what they're looking for is they're looking for professional and personal development. And obviously, if you're then pushing down that professional development line where you say you can go from this level to become a manager, to become this, and this, then you're furnishing what they need and what their desires. So I still think there is a lot to be done with regards to that career structure and how you build that career structure that will help retain some of those Gen Zs. Yes, some are going to move around, but I think that's every generation has done that. Yeah. You know, if you know, and as you get more choice, you know, if you go back to my parents and what have you, you know, they were looking at, you know, 1 or 2 jobs. Their parents before that, it was almost job for life. You know, but as the businesses got bigger, there's more opportunity within the business, and you know, blue collar has turned more into the white collar marketplace in the UK. Then you've got to provide that opportunity for people to be personally developed and develop the career that they want. And if that's at one place and you can hold that person, then I don't see why you can't hold those people, whether they're Gen Z, millennials, or whatever it be. You know, it's what do you give to get that person to stay. So I think the question about when does that transition start, I think, Heather, you've hit it on the head. It starts right from that initial interview stage. And what we tend to do, we interview somebody and then we never re-interview them. We never go back and re-interview them about what do they want? What are they doing? How do I grow this person? And I was your archetypal person, Paul, that, you know, when I was a biller, I didn't care about anybody else. I wanted to be sat in a corner. I didn't want to speak to anybody because I just wanted to bill and bill. And someone said, have you ever thought about being a manager? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And they go, well, but you never speak to anybody. I said, well, my job isn't to speak to anybody. It's my job to speak to candidates and clients. My job's not to speak to the guy over there about making tea and coffee. It's about billing money. But if my job changes to be doing this, then that's what we do. And it's about highlighting that early on. And I think that's what we don't do. We don't interview our consultants often enough to find out what they truly want. And then can we furnish that through a career pattern?
Actually, Howard, your answer was, when you were asked that question, how much more will you pay me? As I would imagine is what you asked.
Actually, it wasn't, Paul. it was all about how much more would you train me?
All right.
And it was, to me, it was all about training. It was all about development. What are you going to develop me? What are you going to train me? What am I going to learn? What am I going to get from this? You know, because if I'm going to do this, then what do I get from it? What do I get? What's going to add that to me? And it was all about my career development. And, you know, that's what it was about. It wasn't about money to me. Money wasn't the object for me. It was all about personal development.
I think a lot of it as well is about the culture of the organization. So if your culture is an aspirational culture, you talk about aspiring, surely what we want for all of our people is we want them to aspire to be the best that they can be in whatever role that is. And our job as leaders then would be to help create the people that work for us to be the best that they can be. And if we know what the best that they can be is, and they know that, and we agree, then that could be any sort of role that's in the organization.
Yeah.
I've been in organizations where being a leader, you are considered to be significantly better and of more value and higher worth than somebody who isn't. And actually, that's not good, because somebody who isn't a leader may be being the best that they can be. in the role that they do. They may be in compliance, they may be in resourcing, they may be in marketing or social media, or whatever it is. If you go down the line of we want you to be the best that you can be, then you have a conversation that's intelligent and articulate, and then you make your promotions as you go along.
It's really interesting. I was going to say, it's really interesting that there's a documentary on, I think it's on Prime, of the Leeds Rugby League triple winning side in 2016, and their coach talks about constantly, his key comment to every player was, "You need to perform today because this might be as good as you ever get." And it was all about trying to get them to step up. And he said, so you might not get any better than this. So this might be your best performance. This might be as good as it ever gets. Go out and make sure it is as good as it can be. And it was really interesting listening to how that sort of conversation goes, Dave, based on that, because you're right, people might not be able to step beyond that sort of realm. That's where their talent runs out and dries up. And that's the bit that you've got to identify. Have you got the person who's as good as they can be? Can you push them that little bit further? Do they want to go that little bit further? And that's a whole different question. So if we push then, if you look at sales skills versus management skills, why is identifying both important to develop a true growth culture?
For me, this is about really understanding what managers add to the mix. You can't just have a sales culture or just a management culture. You've got to have both. I spoke to a young lad last week who rang me absolutely buzzing. So he'd gone to work for a different manager and had a performance review for the first time with a manager who knew what they were doing. And if you could have heard the difference in the way this lad engaged with me and the impact that performance review with a good manager had on his performance and his belief in the organization and his thoughts about his future, it was honestly really quite moving. And I think sometimes we miss how powerful really good management is and how impactful it is. And for me, you can't have a growth culture without understanding the impact both sales skills and management skills have.
I think it's really also about our understanding of what management skills really mean. And, there are a whole range of opportunities now in a modern recruitment business for people to take on additional responsibilities that aren't necessarily grouped under those two headings, sales skills or management skills. And we have people in every business that are very interested and lean towards certain subject matters that are now very important for our industry. So I think we need to understand, and there seems to be, often in my opinion, a lack of understanding of what this phrase management skills actually truly means. And I think when people really understand that, then they can start to understand what kind of individuals they have in the business or can attract to the business who match up against those behaviors and personality traits. Sales skills, I think we pretty much understand. I think that's kind of a given in many respects in our industry, but it's entirely separated, totally and utterly by miles in relation to the skills required to manage people effectively. And Heather, you give a great example there. I mean, we don't know that manager that you've talked about, but we don't know whether that manager exhibits great sales skills. What you've talked about is somebody that's exhibited outstanding management skills. Is that person or was that person a top biller? We don't know. It's quite possible that they weren't. So it's entirely separate skill sets, and you've got to understand what they are in order to identify people in your business that exhibit them, and B, to your earlier point, Heather, find people that you can bring into the business even before they start that potentially have those skill sets.
And I think having those skill sets, Paul, if you've got a list of 5 or 10, whatever the number is, that is also therefore what we should be measuring against.
Yes.
So rather than saying, right, you've hit your target, you're 110%, you're 130%, whatever that number is, you're now going to get promoted. What about skills such as how have you developed yourself? What is your own learning style like? Give us some examples of leadership, some examples of management, because they're very different, as we know. And those, if we're measuring on those sort of things, then when it comes to the conversation about promotion, then you're armed with a lot more information than well done for hitting your target. I've been in a company where people were promoted into leadership that were nowhere near their targets. They were just the right leaders for the right office, and it depends also on the office. I don't think you can have one size fits all.
No.
My Horsham office was very different to my London office, very different to my Edinburgh office, and we have different leaders, different customers, different buying behaviours, different ways of working. So somebody could be promoted to be the leader of the office in Horsham, but that wouldn't have worked for the office in Edinburgh. So as long as you're having those conversations and you know where you are, then you can you can promote people appropriately.
So I think it's interesting, isn't it, that if you spoke to a true salesperson who's just, as we always drive, you're interested in the money, you're just there for the money. What would they prefer? A $5,000 pay rise or a title? Because that's what we're talking with some people. It's the difference between the money or a title. And it's interesting how people get head up on certain titles and certain things. But when you start to look at and identify the difference between what skill sets are for salespeople and for managers, that's where you get what you're talking about there, Dave, is you get that ability to say, right, you're a good, steady, average biller, but you've got some really high-end management traits that could be really, really utilized and developed for growing the next stream of business, etc. You've got some really good high-end sales skills. You're one of our great billers, but you can't manage people because of the way you are. You're very selfish. And when I look at most big billers, they are quite selfish individuals and quite self-centered individuals. And that's fine, because that's what we recruit initially when you look for those type of people. And so I think you've got to sort of get beyond that and split those two skill sets out, then put the behavioral skill sets in. So if we look at then, say, lots of agencies have promotion criteria which is set in stone, which is all about the cash, why is having a career plan that covers behaviors and training in place more advantageous for a growth business?
You have to build something that can deal with the fact that people are individuals, and that their ambition changes. So those selfish, high billing individuals that you're describing, Howard, actually sometimes their lives change and their desires change, and it's not a you're on this trajectory forever. So building that behavioral and training base means that people aren't linear. You don't just go down this structured route in this direction always. Sometimes people do this all over the place with their careers, and that's okay. And so building systems like the ones you're describing means that people can create their own career paths.
But it's having that conversation. I remember having a conversation with a lad that worked for me who was a resourcer and was desperate to become a salesperson. And I had long conversations with him saying, right, look, we're happy to push you into a sales position, and we're happy to make you into a sales position, and we'll train you to do everything that you need to become a salesperson. But I want you to remember constantly that you are an absolute brilliant resourcer and a brilliant account manager, and there will always be a position if you don't make it. And it was interesting, after 6 months he was really struggling, and he said, I know what you said when we first moved into this position, can I go back into resourcing and account management? Absolutely we could. Where most people cut that avenue off and say, well, you've gone down a sales route and therefore the person leaves your business, so you lose good talent. And it's the same pushing people into that management process. Remember, you are a good biller and you will always be a good biller. It's not a backward step. It's you haven't got the right skill set for that, but you've still got the right skill set for that. Let's move that. And I think it's understanding the person and coaching the person through that, so they don't feel like it is a backward step. It is failure that I haven't made it as this. It's not. It's just you're not quite right for that. So, work it and do that. And I think that's part of the great leadership skill from the top, that you're not pushing people into the wrong position. You're giving them an exit as well as a career path both ways.
But just to look at it from another perspective as well, I mean, we're talking here, and I think sort of the intimation is that this is about younger people coming into our business. Now, you'll be aware that the budget is happening today, and there's going to be a lot of discussion about getting maturer workers back into the workplace. So no doubt that the press will be full of that later. And of course, when we talk about bringing mature people into the recruitment industry, some of those people will have probably held senior roles elsewhere, may have been managers of other people, but maybe now at a certain point in their lives, they're not interested in managing other people any longer. They're perfectly comfortable running a desk, if that's the expression we're going to use, or perhaps they've got skill sets that we can use in other directions in the business. I think one of the things we ought to be aware of is that, as you've rightly said, Howard, it's where you are at that point in your life. There are two considerations. One is, do you have the skill sets to be a manager? And you can, as Heather rightly said, maybe we can already identify those in people before they join the business, but certainly as they start working with us, we can identify them. And the second thing is, where are they in their lives at this point? Are they at a point where they want to be managers? Perhaps it's something they can do later on. Perhaps they've already been managers and no longer want to go back to it. So I think that, we have to have a broader understanding, not just of the individual's abilities, but also about their mindset and exactly where they are in their lives at this point.
And I think it's also not being, not always assuming that there's one direction. I've heard so many people criticize people for saying they want to be a resourcer or they don't want to be a manager anymore. I think, movement in all directions we should accept that that's perfectly legitimate for some people, and it's not something negative that means we should rule out appointing people. That understanding of where I am in my career and what I want and where my skills are best used doesn't create linear career paths, and we should accept that.
I'm going to challenge that slightly, Heather, because if we went back 6-7 years ago, my daughter will tell you there is only one direction. Dave.
Oh, Harry, don't get me started on Harry.
Oh, no, really? Is this where this conversation is going now? I don't know.
I'm going to say, take that, Heather.
Gary, now we're talking.
Not proper bango. It's interesting because I was at an event with LinkedIn yesterday, and they had the head of data for Microsoft fly over from Seattle and gave us some stats from LinkedIn's 901 million people who are on there. So they're going for the billion. And they were saying for people born after 97, obviously this will apply to a lot of the people that we hire, they're going to have 5 different careers across 15 different companies. So that affects how we manage and how we promote and what sort of career that our billers, our big billers and our leaders will have. Because the expectation is they're not going to stay there all the time.
Absolutely.
And they're looking for other careers and other ways of working. So if we're just going to promote on one criteria, we may miss out on some of those people having really good skills to do other stuff.
But that's a really interesting way of looking at it, though, isn't it? When you start to talk about it like that, we've always talked about how many jobs you're going to have in a lifestyle. What they're talking about, you're going to have 5 careers across 15 different jobs. That's a very different way of looking. I've never thought about it in that fashion, and that's a very different way that what career section are you in at this moment in time? What are you going into? Where do you want to be? That's a really interesting way of looking at it, Dave. I like that.
Well, there's another thing we were talking about last week, which was it's a bit of a cliche now, plural careers, and this is defining people that actually have more than one job. So they might work for us for 2 or 3 days a week whilst doing 1 or 2 other jobs. And that is now becoming a theme. We've often talked about in the past portfolio careers and multiple careers, but this is now something that I think is becoming much more evident. And so therefore, somebody with relevant skills to help us in certain directions may not want to do the certain things we'd like them to do from a perspective of management because they're doing other jobs. And again, we need to be open-minded about I think attracting those people into our organizations. It's no longer about necessarily 5 days a week. That I think has now gone out the window over the last few years. So again, that's another layer in considering who can manage, who wants to manage, what they want from their lives, their lifestyles, their work-life balance, and so forth. All of those are considerations. And as you rightly said, can change from 1 month to another or 1 year to another. It's important that we just remain very close to our people and establish where they are in their lives and their careers and try to provide them with options to develop their careers and stay with us in the long term.
So there's a question then that's begging to be asked then, isn't it? If we're stepping across those 5 different career patterns, as the recruiter takes one step from being a recruiter and crosses that bridge into management, what should the expectations be as they mature into that role then?
What a huge question.
I think I would define success for them and again, this is leadership rather than management, is how have you helped other people reach their potential? For me, that's what leaders do. So if you're gonna lead somebody, demonstrate to me how you are helping other people reach their potential. And I would promote people on their ability to do that.
I think that's a great point. And I also think that our expectations of people when they make that crossover into management is that they are by no means the finished product. They have a job title now, and they have the benefits or the salary that go alongside that role, but they are still novices. They're still people that haven't yet developed and matured into the job. So our expectations should reflect that. We need to be providing new managers and indeed existing managers with a level of development and support, but not expect that the moment they do that, make that crossover from being a consultant to a manager, that they can manage effectively and everything's going to just be hunky-dory. That isn't the case. You know, we need to be providing a whole range of support, development, training, coaching, mentoring, and so forth that will enable that person over a period of time to grow and develop into their new role. And as I said, it's not then saying, well, a year or two down the line, okay, they're now at the level we're comfortable with, we're happy with. It's continuing to develop that individual because, again, what level of management are they in? Do we want them to develop further? Do they want to develop further? Because there are layers of management, of course. So it's an ongoing process. It's not something you just do. You give somebody a manager's role, there you go, off you trot, and let's see how you get on, which I'm afraid does happen consistently in recruitment businesses. And we set people up to fail under those circumstances.
So it's interesting, isn't it? We talked about having a career path and a proper career path before. If Dave's talking about there's 5 different careers that people are going to go through in their lifestyle, then obviously to me, what we should be thinking about is setting expectations from the start of that. When you enter one career path before you exit it, there'll be an increase of expectations all the way across that. And I think that's what recruitment agencies are very poor at, is, setting what the expectations is from day one to when you exit that career path into the next career path. But what you were talking about there, Paul, is I think that what we all know happens is that, I can't remember what the percentage is now that we talked about last week, the percentage of people that go into management that have 0 management training is scary. And that is the bit that I think we've got to talk about. That to me, it's not what expectations that should we have on the person. I think we should flip that question. I think we should be having what expectations should be on the management team that's already in situ to help develop that manager to be the best manager they can. And therefore, there has to be management training implemented into that situation to then be able to set expectations from. Because if you're just going to throw people into the Daniel into the lion's den and hope they survive, then it's a very, very poor bet.
Absolutely. And what about the managers that manage managers? I mean, that's a whole nother level. Directors or managers, senior managers who manage managers. How much development have they had? Because that's a different style of management, of course, to managing consultants. So, this is it's a broad question. What we have to do is constantly support people internally and where necessary, and it's often the case, recruit external support and advice to assist people at different levels of their journey in management. I was a manager when I was 19. What did I know about managing? You know the answer to that. And I frankly,
were you ever 19, Paul?
I was once. I had a lot of hair as well. I was. I think physically perhaps. But I would, but I think now, 46, 47 years on or whatever it is since I've been in the industry, do I consider myself to be the complete manager? Absolutely not. You're always learning always evolving and changing. And, you're never at a point when you think you know it all, or you conceivably believe you're the finished article. And anyone that believes that is just delusional. Of course, you've got to continue to develop. And it's really important that businesses recognize, no matter what level a manager is, they need support and development.
And I think the key thing to add to that, Paul, is that it's not right that the employee is always looking to the employer to say, develop me, train me, give me this. I think it's really important that anybody, whether they want to go into leadership or management, is that they can demonstrate that they will also take self-learning seriously, and learn themselves, put themselves on a course, read a book, download something, listen to Audible, whatever it is, so that when their boss has a conversation with them, the boss going to ask you, and what have you done to develop yourself? How have you made yourself better? How do you understand the way the industry's going? What's happening? And if they can't answer those questions, or they say, well, I'm just waiting for you to send me on another course, then you kind of know they're not the right people for leadership or management going forward.
And I think that's a great call, Dave, because I remember going through that sort of process myself, that when you speak to people, what have you done to develop yourself, and they've done nothing, they're just waiting for you, then what they're doing is they become that sort of, I can't think of the right way of describing it, but they become so reliant on other people pushing them rather than pushing themselves. Then how can they be, as a manager, how do they develop and drive other people to be the best that they can be if they can't do that for themselves? And I think that's a real sort of thing that lots of people miss when they start to speak to people about becoming a manager. What are you doing to develop yourself? What are you doing to push yourself to the next level? What are you doing to self-learn? What are you doing to self-develop? Because we all know that lots of recruitment agencies, I think it was 79% of all recruitment agencies in the UK have less than 10 heads in, 82% turnover less than £1 million. That sort of says that there's a lot of poor management going on within those companies because they're not growing, they're not scaling, irrespective of looking after the people, looking after the clients, looking after the candidates, etc. So we've got to start to think that management development has got to be, not just from the managers. They need to step out and get expert help coming in, because they only know what they know. And it's what they don't know that's stopping their business growing. And I think that's where we've got to start to develop and push. And everyone's got to understand that they're not the finished article, as Paul said. You've got to step up from that. So let's take this in a slightly different way as we get towards the end of this session. This is always going to be a controversial question, and I'm expecting controversy on the answer. So here we go then.
All right.
Commission. If we look at entry, mid-level and senior level management, how would you bonus them to make them more effective?
Gosh, that's a question, isn't it, honestly?
I'm not going to do the controversial bit, because you guys know way more about the practicalities of this than I do. But one of the things I think we have to include in that is one of the most difficult transitions I've seen in people going from being responsible for their own desk to being responsible for other people and moving up the organization is understanding that the context that they make decisions in stops being about them. And I think whatever bonus and commission you're putting in place has got to help with that transition, so that they don't make a decision in the interest of their own desk, they make it in the interest of a team or of the organisation as a whole, because they're not always the same. And so being able to think long-term strategically and encourage a helicopter view has to be a facet of a bonus scheme for managers.
I totally agree, Heather. I think there comes a point, and I was with a client yesterday, we had this conversation, we were talking about bonus plans for people that we've promoted to senior levels, and the discussion was around that their bonus should be attached to the overall performance of the business rather than their desk. In other words, we spoke to those individuals and said, at this moment and for the foreseeable future, until we get the succession plan where we need it to be, you'll still need to bill, but whether you bill £10,000 or £200,000 is entirely your call. What we need you to do is make sure your business delivers X, Y, and Z in terms of financial output. It's up to you. sensibly, in the short term, you're probably going to have to make a certain level of, or generate a certain level of fees. But your job over the next year, 18 months, frankly, is to get to a point where your own fee generation is either negligible or non-existent, and that the fees are coming through your team, through the business. I think there's a transition point, because if you, as you rightly say, if you ask managers to run desks but build a bigger team, I mean, I think you can run a desk with a relatively small team, but I think when you get to a certain size and you're still asking people to bill and be paid predominantly, their bonus comes predominantly from their desk, it is impossible for that individual to provide the time and energy to the people around them to develop those people whilst they're still worrying about their own income. They're going to gravitate towards making fees on their desk, which is to the detriment of the people around them.
I think it's different on the size of the company as well. Most of the companies that we work with at Jump are sub 50 employees, most of them. So they don't have a great lot of people to manage, and they can't afford to release the top biller. They want to keep her or him really performing well. So I think it depends on the size of the company.
Size of the team, yeah, I'd agree.
Size of the team, on the size of the company, because you may decide to continue to reward a big biller really well and put them into some sort of leadership role and have a different scheme for that. It's kind of horses for courses. If you've only got 9 or 10 people in your company, and to you, scaling looks like you're going to get to 20 people, and 20 people puts you in the top 10-15% of all recruitment companies in the UK, then you can flex your commission scheme. If you're on a Deco or a Hayes or a Randstad, you're going to have much more appropriate commission schemes. Because everybody, there's paths and there's career paths and there's ways of doing things, like the sort of organizations we've all worked for in the past. But I think you can have flexibility, and you should have flexibility in a more niche company that's not going to get to that sort of size.
I'll just add a point that Heather kind of alluded to this, and I think it's really important to make this position, and that is that we know that bonus plans dictate behavior. Yeah. It's just a fact. If you design bonus plans carefully with a great deal of thought, and you're aligning those bonus plans to the behaviors and values of your business, they won't all be related necessarily to pure finance. So, you have to be thinking very carefully about what it is you're looking for. Of course, a lot of it is going to be, almost all of it, aimed at financial output, but there may well be several areas where you want to align bonus to a certain level of behavior or values that you deem to be appropriate for your business. What we do know, absolutely, is that the way you compose your bonus plans will definitely dictate the behavior of the individuals that you've provided that bonus plan to. So it's something to think, as I know everybody does that's listening, very carefully about.
So if you think then that's differentiating between management skills, sales skills, etc. So I always think when we talk about this topic, I always think, what can that person actually affect? And so when you start thinking about that sort of junior entry-level manager, they can affect the gross profit line. So to me, you'd be paying them on the commission of the gross profit that their team produces rather than what they individually produce, and then a small bit on their team. Because if you can get, if the team has to produce £1 million, but you're part of that £1 million, whether you bill £1 or £1 million, it makes no difference. You've got to get the whole team to bill. As you start to get through to that mid-level management, then it's about what their team actually produce as a profit at the end, because you're now talking about looking after managing the costs and the total cost of the business. And that senior level management, I think you're absolutely right, Paul. You pay them on the profit of the whole business. And so they're actually working in the whole business. I think that's that transition that you're going through from, what's expected. And I think what happens when most people get promoted from being a recruiter into a manager, they're still acting as a recruiter because their remuneration is all about what a recruiter is remunerated on, their own billings. You take that away, that starts to separate those that truly want to be a manager to those that actually want to bill. And that's a huge differentiation, because how many people do I see in management positions who are saying, I get 2, 3, 4, 5% of the team's billings, the rest comes from my own commission, and you suddenly look at their attrition rate, it's huge because they're billing so much that 4%, 5% is pennies to them, and they're not bothered about it, and therefore they're not bothered about the team. Where if you flipped it the other way around, it'd be absolute. They'd be all driving, all coaching, all mentoring, because it's the team. And that's a big thing that I discovered when I stepped across into a proper billing manager, where I was relying on my team to bill. It's suddenly a scary place that you suddenly think these people are in charge of my commission. Then I realized that actually it's the other way around. I'm in charge of their commission, because the more I develop them, coach and mentor them, the more that they will bill. So the better the person I get sat in the seat, the better it will be. So I think that entry level gross profit line, mid-level net profit line, senior level EBIT line of the whole business is where I would set that from my point of view. So here's a final question then. If we were running a recruitment agency and you only had a limited training budget, would you invest in your management training or your sales training?
Both.
Yeah, both.
How much though, Paul? How much? Both's a bit of a sit on the fence answer.
No, it's not. It's not a sit on the fence answer. I don't think you can ignore either team. I think you have to invest. If you have a limited budget, you're going to have to be creative about how you're going to do this. But I don't think it's a one or the other. I think you absolutely have to invest in both sides.
I'll go off the fence then, Paul, and I'll say management, but make sure your management training includes sales training, so that your managers are delivering.
I'll go off the fence by saying, if you've only got a limited training budget, you're not spending money wisely enough.
Great answer.
Thanks. So the question I was expecting controversy on, we had no controversy, but the question on training budget is just all kicking off.
You can't scale a business and not spend money on training.
Yeah, you got to.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying there, Paul, well, but mainly Heather, what you're saying there is I would put most into my management, or more into my management, because your management can then train other things into your salespeople and get an equilibrium. Where I think what usually happens with most companies, it's 90%, sales, 10% management, if there's any management training budget at all, and that's where it sort of goes wrong. So I think there has to be a sort of a minimum 50-50 split on both. But if you get the right managers in, then they will train and develop the right people anyway. And so therefore it's, I would invest heavily in my management training to make sure my managers are trained properly to really develop the staff below them. Because as we discussed last week, they are the most influential people in your business on the staff below.
Nicely summarised.
Well said.
Well done, Harry.
Thanks for that. It's nice to get a bit of a pat on the back from you guys occasionally. I know it's very occasionally.
Does it?
It's the annual. I'll mark it on the calendar. It's the same time last year. I got the same one, so I'll mark it down. It must be that same day. I'm going to close it there because I think we've discussed an awful lot today about that transition piece and what's going on. Next week it is the Expo, so there's none of us if you go to the Expo, then we might see you down there at the Expo. If you're not going, then have a look around. It's a good place to see online, see who's out there. The week after that, though, we're back. Okay, and what we're going to talk about next time, we're going to really dig into this situation. One of the biggest mistakes agency owners make is promoting their big billers into managers, and we're talking about the problems that actually creates and what those problems manifest into that become a bigger issue for the business. And I think it's really important that we understand the problems that it does create by promoting the wrong people, because without knowing what those issues are, then we'll carry on promoting and never sort of realize that there is an issue from there. So ladies and gents, thanks very much. Paul, Dave, and Heather, again, thank you very much for your time and input, much appreciated. And if we don't see you at the Expo, we'll see you all a week, well, on the 29th, is it 29th, on the 29th of March. Catch you later.
See you, everybody. Take care.
Have a great week, everybody. Thanks, Age.